Anyway, why don't we begin? And welcome, everybody. We are delighted to have you here to join in this conversation about the performing arts in the time of pandemic. I know that artists and the arts, particularly the performing arts, are really suffering during this time. And I thought it would be worthwhile to talk with Chris Hisey and Beth Ulman, who are the directors of the Greater Connecticut Youth Orchestras, and find out how they're doing and learn some lessons for all of us about business. So this is a free flowing conversation, and chime in if you have questions or comments. And Ian Price Murphy, it's welcome. It's nice to meet you, and hope this is a productive time for all of us. Anyway, Chris and Beth, particularly welcome, and tell us a little bit about the program, Bridgeport Youth Orchestras, and what's going on, particularly during this time of when you're closed.
So, hi guys, and thanks for having us. So I'm the music director of the Greater Connecticut Youth Orchestras, and Beth is our executive director, and as such, we operate as a team. I sort of handle all of the musical end of things, and Beth is the business side of things, and we are in close contact all the time about our organization and how it works and all of that good stuff. And we also have a board of directors that is made up largely of parents with a couple of community members. Although, to be honest, we're trying to change that over a little bit more and get more of the outside community involved in our board. And we are made up of about 350 students ranging from all over Connecticut, about between 35 and 40 towns around the state of Connecticut. We rehearse when we're not in quarantine. We rehearse on Saturday mornings at one of the local public schools from 9 until about 2:30 in the afternoon. We have 10 educationally sequential ensembles, a string orchestra, a wind orchestra, concert orchestra, which is our first full orchestra, then symphony orchestra, and principal orchestra. Those are the three full orchestras that are winds, brass, and percussion. We also have a chamber orchestra, 2 jazz bands, and a percussion group. So it's a big program with a lot of moving parts, and as you can imagine, when it became clear that we were going to have to suspend or at least stop our active in-person rehearsals, that caused some problems. But through the use of technology and some other things, we've been able to at least carry on the content and have been able to put together some virtual performances. So, the pandemic is affecting the arts pretty broadly. I mean, I and some of my colleagues are among the lucky ones who are in the arts, who I teach also at Greens Farms Academy, and so I have a salaried position that has been continuing. But I do know friends who are freelance musicians who haven't made any money since the beginning of March and don't have anything on the books from now until whenever we're allowed to gather together again and do performance. So that's hard for a lot of musicians, and small businesses. At least now the small businesses are starting to open up again, so that's good. But with music being on the very back burner until they figure out what the vaccine situation is going to be, it's going to be a while before the arts come back to what they were before the beginning part of March. So what are we doing in the time of pandemic? Well, we're operating mainly via Zoom. We meet with the kids on Saturday mornings for about 15 or 20 minutes. We've found that longer Zoom meetings than that with kids, especially the little ones, don't work so well because they don't have the attention span to get through it, and especially when they've been trying to do Zoom school or whatever they're doing, online school, all week long. By the time they get to Saturday morning, their attention span is even less than it might have been otherwise. So we meet with the kids. We generally give them assignments that they can complete over the week, and keep them on task that way. And then these virtual videos that we've been doing, which I can share one with you at the end. We asked the kids, we put together a recording that they play with, and we asked the kids to listen to headphones and listen to the recording that we send them, and record themselves playing it on a separate device. So they have to have two pieces of technology, a phone or an iPad and a laptop. And they listen to the one recording on their laptop, and while they're listening to that, they record themselves playing to that recording on a separate device. They send us the videos, and then I can stack them. I've been stacking videos in a program called WeVideo, which is online, and it allows us to put together a virtual performance. So that's sort of how we're existing. It's not great, but it works. It's kept us in business.
May I ask you a question, Chris?
Of course.
Is that similar to the concerts that we've seen in the last couple of weeks of all the pop musicians, where they're in separate houses?
Yep.
But they're playing by themselves.
Yep, exactly. It's just.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, and I'll show you one when we get to the end. I'll show you one.
Chris, can I add just?
Of course, please.
But besides the kids engaging with the conductors, another big piece of our business is making sure that parents are happy and engaged, because they're the ones who ultimately make the decision about where the kids are going to end up for their music instruction. So we've had, we've been communicating frequently with the families, with the parents, telling them, what our plans are. That at this point, we're mostly telling them that we're planning for next year. We haven't given them specifics because we don't know those specifics yet, but we want to reassure them that, it's, while it's not business as usual, we're still continuing. And Chris just put out a video message yesterday saying that GCTYO is in a very strong position. And we have gotten, we started registrations for next year, and about a third of the families have already signed up for next year, even though we don't know, we told them we don't know exactly what the program is going to look like. So I think from a business perspective, that's, an equally important piece. And we've had some, correspondence with some parents thanking Chris and all the conductors for keeping up the lessons and the groups, the group meetings and things like that. So the parents are appreciative of that as well.
Absolutely. And Beth and I have been having meetings with some other of the local youth orchestra leaders and some of the other people around, like David Green, for example, from the Cultural Alliance of Fairfield County, and Lawrence Queso, who is the executive director of the Klein. And Connecticut has not been forthcoming, and probably because they don't know yet what the guidelines for groups like ours are going to look like. So we don't know yet what we're going to be able to do in September. So we've been trying to figure that out, and it's interesting, I think, because Lawrence at the Klein, for example, has said that they've applied for grants to purchase a whole bunch of equipment to make it possible for them to open. So thermometers, for example, having to take everybody's temperature when they walk in the door, and having staff there to be able to monitor and control the crowds, keeping them distance, but also if somebody shows up with a fever, asking them to step aside. They have to wait 5 minutes or something like that, and then they have to have their temperature measured again. If their temperature is 101 or above, they're asked to step aside. They have to wait 5 minutes, then they come back over, they take their temperature again, and if the temperature is still 101 or above, then they're asked to go home. And then, of course, that raises issues. Well, what do you do if the person refuses to go home, and how do you handle that? And hiring enough staff in a performing venue to be sure that you can cover all the eventualities that come with people gathering in larger groups. They have 1,400 seats at the Klein, and they've measured the whole thing out, and they think they can seat 450 people safely, appropriately distanced with masks and the whole thing. Sort of related to that, I had a meeting. I'm on the committee to reopen our church, and we had a committee meeting last night, sort of the first one. And our bishop has said that everybody in church, when we reopen, is going to wear a mask, and that the churches all have to have masks available. And if somebody comes to the church without a mask, you have to offer them one. And if they refuse to wear a mask, then the minister is supposed to say a benediction and send everybody home. So,
Can't just send that person home?
no, they have to say a benediction and send the entire congregation home if one person refuses to wear a mask.
Wow.
So, that's sort of the environment that we're going to be when everybody starts coming out of their houses again in full swing. That's the environment that we're going to be in. And as you can imagine, with a performing arts organization that particularly deals with kids, that presents challenges for us. For example, how many kids can we safely put in a room spaced 6 feet apart? Are the kids going to be required to wear masks? The answer is probably. We're going to have to take everybody's temperature. We're going to have to record everybody who shows up. We're going to have to take attendance at the door so that we have a record for social tracing. We don't know whether we're going to be allowed to teach our winds and brass players. And if we can't do that, does that mean that we have to have alternate program choices for them to participate in, or whether we don't have winds and brass for a year? So there are all kinds of questions that we have that we haven't answered yet.
And how are you going about answering those questions? That was one of my questions about kids on the stage. It's fine with the audience, but how do you deal with kids on the stage? And then, again, how are you working out those questions? Do you have a group? Do you have...
Well, so I'll let Beth talk about the groups that we're putting together.
Yep. So we had a group meeting this past week with some of the other youth organizations, music youth organizations in Fairfield County. And we are also forming our own GCTYO task force. We've asked a few of the parents who are medical professionals to join that task force, a pediatrician, a nurse who works at Greenwich Hospital, and a doctor who works at Yale. They're all parents, and they volunteered to help us out because we do think that it's going to come down to some really detailed work in terms of how we're going to run a rehearsal if we decide to move forward and can do that safely. So I also participated in a call today. There are lots and lots of opportunities to get on webinars and Zoom calls about reopening and how that's going to happen. And the one today was with arts groups all throughout Connecticut, with someone from the Yale School of Public Health talking about specifics, about air, cleaning the air, and what you can do to, minimize germ transfer, and all sorts of things. But even he said, you know, everybody's waiting. Everybody has to wait until we hear more from the state. And at the moment, the state is very focused on the June 20th partial reopening of some of the businesses in Connecticut, and the arts are not included in that date. And so they haven't focused on it. They haven't really released a whole lot of guidelines. I mean, there are task force out there who are putting out interim kind of publications saying you should consider this and you should consider that. And it's all a lot of common sense, but there's always stuff in there that you didn't think of. But you know, our plan really is to be as flexible and as fast moving as possible, so that when we are told one way or another, if the answer is yes, you can reopen in a minimal way, that we're ready for that. And one thing Kristen mentioned is we're looking at, rather than large orchestra groups next year, running a lot of small chamber groups with just 4 kids and an instructor in a room, in a building that has a lot of smaller rooms, and just sort of cycling people through. Another challenge that we're facing right now is actually rehearsal space, because for up until March, we were rehearsing in the Fairfield Public Schools. And we're fairly certain that even if the schools reopen in September, they're not going to allow outside groups in on the weekends, because they're going to want to do deep cleaning. And it's just not going to be an option. So in addition to all of this flux, we have to find a place where we can rehearse in the fall. And we've made a little bit of headway, but that adds sort of a degree of uncertainty to it all. So
Yeah, it certainly does. You mentioned earlier that the orchestra is in a really strong position. What makes you, why are you so strong? And we're answering that question with this discussion, but what have you done to stay strong in this time?
Well, a number of things. I mean, Beth and I have been working really hard to establish a budget, and the board too, to establish a budget that as a 501c3 allows us to continue from year to year. And we've experienced a lot of growth. And so we've been very fortunate in that way. So we've been finishing our budget year well into the black over the last several years. And with that extra money, since I became music director 11 or 12 years ago, whatever it is now, I've been yelling and screaming and pounding my fist on the table that we needed to have a reserve fund. And we now have a couple $100,000 in a reserve fund. So we have about a season's worth of salaries and minimal operational expenses. So if we were forced to go dark this coming season, which sadly is at this point, I don't think it's a big possibility, but it's still there. I think it still is a small possibility that we'll have to go dark for the season. But if we do, we have enough money in the bank that we can cover operational expenses to get us through the year. Obviously, our budget would be, we won't be spending a lot of money if we're dark, or not as much as we usually do. But, the other thing is we won't be making a whole lot of money if we go dark too. But like I said, thankfully we have an operational reserve now. So in that way, we are in a very strong position. Beth, how else are we in a strong position?
Well, like I said, I think the families want us to continue in some form. Nobody wants their kids' music education to be interrupted. So I think rather than, it's a very, very small possibility of going black. I think the only way that would, going dark, I think the only way that would happen is if we really didn't think we could sustain, our staff salaries, if we had much more limited income. But I think even if we run virtual rehearsals like we've been doing at a much reduced price, we could still, the kids would still get some benefit from GCTYO. And as I said, we already have about a third of our members have already registered for an audition for next year. So they're hopeful for something. I guess that doesn't mean they're actually going to join, but I've only actually had one parent say, we're going to wait to see if rehearsals are in person, because my kids don't like the virtual rehearsals. And we definitely have lost some kids to the virtual rehearsals, but we've probably retained about, I don't know, 75, 80% with the virtual rehearsals. So, I guess the other thing that makes us strong is that there is a loyalty to the program. Some families have been with us for a very long time through multiple children. Often the kids start at a young age and they just never leave. So, we have those sort of stalwarts who are going to stick with us through thick and thin, because they know that we're going to do as much as we can, to continue the music education. All right, yeah.
Yeah. And Dad, you asked what the part of getting kids on stage. I mean, if we do those smaller groups, we just put them on stage 6 feet apart, 8 feet apart, whatever it is, in a mask. And I mean, that's, once we figure out we can do that, I think the stage part of it is not all that difficult. It's when you throw the kids together in a room with parents, how are we going to handle the traffic in and out of the performance hall? Not so much the kids, but what are we going to do with the audience? If we have...
That's not really our problem. That's the client's problem.
Well, that's true. It is our problem.
Our problem is more, what are we going to do on a Saturday morning at the school, or wherever we're rehearsing? And I think the answer is, their parents won't be allowed to come in the way they always have been. We're not going to be inviting 30 parents to come in and volunteer. We probably won't have our snack. We'll maybe have a break, but the kids will definitely be wearing masks. So the social aspects of our program are going to have to change, and just as everybody's lives have changed socially. But I think people would expect that.
Mm-hmm. I'm just sitting here wondering about this end of things. I mean, with 350 kids, you can see how many people we actually affect on a Saturday morning. I mean, if parents and whoever else, who are coming into downtown Fairfield on a Saturday morning, and a lot of them stick around. They go to the local coffee shops, or they do shopping, or they do what they do. And if we're not, all of a sudden, if we're not rehearsing on a Saturday morning through the beginning of the fall, I mean, we're not going to have a huge impact on the local economy, but some of those places are not going to have all of those parents who come in doing business with them on Saturday mornings. It's probably minimal impact, but all of these little things sort of ripple together to create, I think, bigger problems that other people other than me are going to have to figure out, thankfully. How to sustain the economy in small towns when groups like ours are not allowed to be there and aren't bringing people into town. So I don't know.
I think there's a bigger issue that I'd like to hear from too, and that is why the arts? Why is this important? Why are people? What are you getting out of the arts, and why are you in them? Why do kids come to the orchestra?
Well, I mean, there is definitely a value add to having the arts in a kid's life. I mean, that goes without saying. And the reason is that there have been multiple studies now, that say that participating in the arts makes you smarter. It creates pathways in the brain that do not get created otherwise. It helps with problem solving. It helps with socialization. It helps with all kinds of things. And when you're talking about a program like the Greater Connecticut Youth Orchestras, we are, not only talking about music education, but I always tell the kids, I'm not only teaching you about music, but I'm teaching you about the creation of something beautiful. And that matters. Especially today, that matters with, everything that goes on in the world. We seem to live in a society. Well, I had an old mentor that said, You know, society's not really any more violent than it used to be. It's just that you see it on TV all the time. But we seem to be in living in a time when there's a lot of violence, and the arts teach kids about creation rather than destruction. And that's a really, really, really important thing.
Can I chime in?
Oh, yeah, of course.
As a parent too, my daughter has gone through the 8 years of GCTYO, and I think that the social aspects of a youth orchestra are really special. Be, in terms of one, the sort of feeling of being on a team, not a sports team, but a real team, because they're working so hard together to produce something that sounds really good. And you can tell by when they're done with a performance how they're either smiling or they're just exhausted because they've been concentrating so hard. I look at a lot of concert pictures, and I see some kids have this big, huge grin on their face, and other kids look like they really need a nap. But I think that no matter what, they all feel a sense of pride, and the pride of being in a group like that together. They really connect with each other. And I think that's one of the reasons kids come back year after year. And, they don't get that in a school orchestra, because in the school orchestra, the school band, not all the kids care that much. I mean, there are some who do, but it's very frustrating when, maybe 70% of the kids don't care that much and they're not trying that hard. When they come to GCTYO and everybody's trying really hard to do their best, it definitely makes a difference. And the kids, they achieve, they push each other, they compete with each other in a good way. And then they are producing, as Chris said, something beautiful together. That was my parent hat, not my executive director hat.
Yeah.
Well said, though.
Folks, I'm going to have to run. I have a 12:30 or 1 o'clock to get prepared for, but I think you guys have a handle on the problem, and it's a great program. Sounds like a great program for the kids. It would be a shame to lose that. But
We won't lose it.
like you said, you're strong enough where you won't lose it, right? So
You have
thanks, Jim. Thanks for the invite.
You have 2 minutes to look at one quick thing that
Yeah,
we
sure. Yep.
Dad, can you allow me to share my screen? Go to security and hit participants can share screen or whatever. You're muted.
Jim, you're muted.
There you go.
Thanks. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Do you know?
Yeah, down on the bottom of your screen on the left side, there's a thing that says security.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Click on that and allow screen sharing or whatever.
Got it. Now you should be able to.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, they're hearing the tape of playing into another device.
That's right. I don't know if you can see, but they're all wearing headphones. Or they have earbuds in.
kids are here?
It's about 55.
Very nice.
Yeah, very cool.
So, sorry about that.
You guys.
All right, Charlie, thank you. And I think this has been a wonderful conversation. Maybe this is a good thing to stop on, but I would like to continue it. It's really important. Can you guys come back for another session sometime soon, or as we get closer to what's going on?
Sure.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Once we figure out what we're doing and what it's going to look like, we'd be happy to come back.
Well, good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Jim.
Yep. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Chris.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.